to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, so if you've listened to other episodes, you'll probably like future episodes. And this one. For this conversation, I spoke with Sarah Gerard, who is the author of the essay collection Sunshine State, which was longlisted for the PEN Diamonstein-Spielvogel Award for the Art of the Essay, and the novel Binary Star, which was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Art Seindenbaum Award for First Fiction. Her short stories, essays, interviews, and criticism have appeared in the New York Times, T Magazine, Granta, Baffler, and Vice, and in the anthologies Tampa Bay Noir, We Can't Help It If We're From Florida, and Small Blows Against Encroaching Totalitarianism. She lives with her true love, the writer Patty Yumi Cottrell. Find her at sarahgerard.com, and of course, the book that came out in early July, True Love, with which we spend most of our time conversing. There's also some minor spoilerier bits for True Love, so I encourage you to just go ahead and buy the book, read the book, and then come back and listen to the episode. Sarah reads from chapter 2 at the end of this episode, so if you need a little bit more convincing than just my word, you can skip to the end, listen to that, then go buy the book, read the book, and listen to the actual conversation. If you would like to help out the show, you can do so in a one-time fashion at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. At the $2 level, you'll get some occasional flash fiction and poetry from me, and about a week early episodes of this show and any other podcast I may do in the future. And I'm now starting at the $5 level, a serialized story of about 1,000 words a week entitled Jellyfish Aches, which is dark and grimy and ridiculous, absurd, and just kind of weird. So if you're into that, patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. That's enough of me asking you to give me money. Let's get into what you're here for, which is my conversation with Sarah Gerard. So a couple days ago, you tweeted an article on the Baffler called What Women Want that talks about your book, True Love, and the novel I Want.
Lynn Seeger Strong.
That's the one, yes. And it highlights what I was thinking as I was reading this, because I before reading True Love, I had also read Juliet the Maniac, which is kind of in the same sort of subgenre.
I love that book.
It's so good.
So good.
My Year of Rest and Relaxation I read earlier this year. And it's this sort of thing, this like women in like this post lean-in sort of world, writing first person. That the Baffler article links to another article that I skimmed this morning, called I'm Not Feeling Good at All. And as a man who also like has read not nearly enough women, like it's a really sort of jarring experience, especially someone like me who reads a lot of experimental stuff. So it's a lot of like, you know, just messing with form and just kind of like pure emotion into this really compact and visceral, real sort of world. Yeah.
Yeah, well, visceral and real. I think those are the words that stand out to me here. Another person asked me recently in an interview for a Southern Review why the body is so outsized in my work, and I hung on to that word outsized, and because I don't think it's outsized. I think that I'm trying to convey the intensity of a moment, in a given scene, and in reaching for emotion, I have to reach for its experience in the body. I mean, and I think also the sharpened attention that comes with fear. I think a lot of what is happening in True Love is different degrees of fear or panic or shame, or which is a kind of fear, or paired with desire, and which I think beneath that desire is also Nina's fear of being alone or being abandoned or rejected. So and so what she wants is safety and being, and to be protected and loved and accepted. And, our primary experience of that as humans in this world is touch with a mother, right? And so the first thing a baby experiences is the touch of another human being, whether that's the nurse, first the nurse and then the mother when they're laid on the mother's chest. It's like that really fundamental reassurance that Nina is looking for. And so, so, and meanwhile, her, in her, I think, sharpened attention, she's making very, factual, just kind of reporting on what she sees, or reporting the facts of the environment that she's in. So we have, I guess, that, that really intense duality of inside and outside, or interior and exterior, the beating of her heart in her chest, or feeling like she's floating to the bathroom in a moment of panic. And then, and then the cold of the tile, as she sits in the bathroom floor, for instance.
Yeah.
And that sharp difference. So I hope that answers. I'm not sure if there's a question.
But there wasn't really a question. It was.
Yeah.
There's I put myself when I do this show, I put myself in a weird position because I perpetually feel underread, and then when it comes to like reading Not White Men and then talking to the people who write, about that, I feel always like just profoundly unversed in what I'm reading and then what I'm talking about.
Well, I like the pairings that you made in a couple of minutes ago with Juliet Escoria and Otessa Moshfegh and Lynn Seeger-Strong. I mean,
yeah,
I think, our work does have this commonality of, I think just very intense female narrators who want, like Caitlin said in her review, beyond their means.
Yeah.
And who also aren't afraid to report on their pain.
Yeah. And just being like profoundly flawed too, I think,
right,
helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, profoundly flawed for sure. Yeah, I mean, and profoundly but unashamedly.
Yeah.
It's not. We're not special for being flawed. We, and I mean by we, I mean the female narrators. They're not. They're flawed for they're flawed, and they're examining the reasons why, or they're examining their response to that revelation or that unavoidable fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. And other people too.
Yeah.
Other people's flaws too. Yeah.
One of the things I sort of messed up when I was marking on Goodreads that I was reading the book, I briefly skimmed some of the user reviews, which is sometimes really enlightening and sometimes not.
I don't read them. Just to let you know, I don't. No, I really don't, and I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do it. Yeah.
I
mean, not that I'm afraid to admit that my work is flawed. I just, because everybody's work is flawed.
Right.
And I'm sure mine is. And I'm sure that I know that this book is not for everyone. And I don't, but, I think that people make wild assumptions about authors in their reviews and why you write what you write and what kind of person would write this and, or just, crazy assumptions about the way you live your life. And I can't engage with that.
Sure. Yeah. I saw someone on Twitter basically saying something like, hey, this book that's about to come out has a lot of stuff that's really uncomfortable, and I wrote it in first person. It's not autobiographical. Please don't.
Yeah.
Please don't yell at me
Yeah.
for the things that are in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was interesting because the two that I saw were, one was positive and one was less positive, but they were both for the same reason, in that the characters to them were unlikable. And so I went into it reading like the first third of the book. I was like, oh, this is kind of how I imagine the show Girls is, because I've never seen it, but I've just heard people complain about it. Really, I was like, oh, this is probably it. Sort of this like post-millennial sort of like arty people who have privilege.
Yeah.
But oh my God, the book ramps up, and it really creeps up on you in like, oh, Seth is annoying because he reads like a placard next to a painting. Like he talks like that. And then
you.
suddenly, like, 100 pages later, people are throwing things at each other and, bleeding and fighting and screaming. And it was really masterful to me how that tension just creeped up on me until I was like, wait a minute, these characters are no longer annoying or pretentious. They're like actively dangerous.
Right. It's a range. It's a range of behavior. I think each of the characters in the book is, well, one of the things I was thinking about was toxicity and how that manifests in our world, in our environment, in our media, in our government, and in our personal interactions, or in our homes. And toxic masculinity is a range of behaviors. Rebecca Solnit wrote about this years ago. Men Explain Things to Me. It's a great collection. I think it should be basic, I think it should be required reading in every high school. But yeah, I think, there's some really three-dimensional depictions of toxic relationships in the book, and the men stand out, because I think the men stand out because, it's a pattern in Nina's life that, that it's almost as if her relation to the male sex is itself a sort of trance. So that escalates as consequences mount for her, inability to be honest with herself and other people about that, and about, like you said, her flaws. She puts herself in situations without, I think, fully realizing the potential consequences, and that does turn dangerous after a while, and there's not an easy escape.
No, there's not. Oh, about halfway through, I sort of had this revelation with myself that I should read the book like it were a self-help book. And I have a feeling that wasn't intended, but it was like, oh, here's all these things not to do. Like there was a point where I realized, oh, these characters aren't going to change. Like their self-reflection methods are flawed. It's only going to get worse. It's reading like a noir story. But I can use it.
Yeah, it's really seedy.
Yeah.
Very seedy environment. Yeah.
But I can use it as a reader to and as a person, in a relationship to kind of see what happens. Because there's great passive aggression that happens happens every day that you notice in the book as part of this ongoing conflict that happens.
What do you mean? Say more about that.
Oh, geez.
Passive aggression.
Oh, man. Your academia.
I agree with you. Barely. I'm an adjunct.
It was a lot of the conflict with Aaron about money.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of the way that Nina and Aaron talk to each other about money, and the way that they're both sort of seeing Nina's sort of looking at results, whereas Aaron's looking at things in terms of potential, and the way that they interact, not knowing or not accepting that the other person's looking at it that way, and then not taking that into account. I don't know. I just feel like that happens an awful lot where we're not talking about the same things. I don't know if I went down the path the way you wanted me to go down the path.
No, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, because Aaron is thinking in terms of potential, but and you're right. Nina is thinking in terms of, I guess, of the of reality, like the facts of their situation, and I think they're both trying in their own ways, but Aaron perhaps is failing to realize that investment, that if he's making an investment, the down payment must come from somewhere, and he expects that to come from Nina or from his parents, or just from the world that owes it to him. That he should just be invited. He should just be invited in because he's here, right? I'm here at the door of potential. Please open. But he doesn't. But somebody, and he thinks that it should just open sesame, and he. But I think at the same time, like, how do I say this? Well, I think their conversation in the brunch spot is, kind of says it all. Nina's like, you stay home playing on your computer all day doing who knows what. I'm not, ostensibly writing your script, but where is it? And who's going to make it? And who's paying our rent? She's like, I'm working retail and taking off my clothes on the side to pay our rent. And he says, don't be dramatic. And that's exactly what is happening. And I think Nina feels as if she's making an unfair investment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember an old piece I read on Cormac McCarthy, who lost his first wife. She divorced him for sort of the same reason. Like, he put out books and obviously didn't make a whole lot of money because he was living off of being a novelist, and was invited to give talks at colleges. And he was like, why would I talk about my book? I wrote it. Just read the book. And so they were like living in a shed eating beans. And like, you can't just go give a talk for $2,000 at a college. Like, who cares if you, just go talk about your book so you can feed your wife.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Nina says, go get a job at the coffee shop where you go every day and pay $5 for a latte. They know you. They see you every day. And he says, well, I don't have any coffee shop experience. And she says, who cares? Go ask. Basically, just go at least apply. And then he says, well, then I wouldn't be available if somebody wanted to make my movie. It's like,
yeah. It's so frustrating.
It's designed to be infuriating. Yeah. The entitlement is baffling.
Right. And I say this as a person who saw a lot of me, like, in the latter half of college and maybe first 2 years out of college. Like, I want to say it's like a hyperbolized version of me, but like, there's a lot of that in there. That's just like, but wait, the day I decide to get a real job is the day that someone's going to come knocking at my door. And what do I do then? Not like, oh, I guess I'll just quit my job if a better opportunity comes along, which is, the thing that you would do. So I guess that's where I come at it, thinking of like almost reading it like a self-help book. Like,
So,
like, oh my God, like there's so much of me in there. And like, I dislike a lot of these characters for the things that they do, but I'm also seeing the things that they do that I dislike within myself. So, God damn it, I had to learn from reading a book. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, you brought up Cormac McCarthy, and certainly Cormac McCarthy is a genius, and it's possible Aaron is also a genius, but it's possible Nina is too, and it's possible Cormac McCarthy's wife was too, and how many male geniuses are we aware of throughout history, versus women who've been purposefully erased from history because a male genius relied upon their investment.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, the basic assumption that Nina should make sacrifices so that Aaron can live a life of leisure and find himself through his script is pretty. While Nina has to eke away at her MFA and and whatever review she's writing for the Brooklyn Rail, in her off hours, I mean, all of that is sort of underwriting that conversation in the brunch restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, for the longest time, I looked at that Cormac McCarthy story as sort of like heroic, like the single-mindedness. I'm a big fan of David Lynch and like his art life thing at the expense of everything else in his life, like art and coffee and cigarettes. Like that's what I care about. Like there's a pressure that I feel to like get closer to that almost like monastic ideal as an artist. That's just, it's unattainable if you also care about having relationships with people.
Well, yeah. I mean, or unless you have a partner who is equally invested in that story, which Nina is not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Nina cares as much about her own art as Aaron cares about his. So,
and then you throw in.
I mean, I.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think if Nina were living in that studio apartment by herself and living her monastic artist life and supporting herself, working retail and modeling for drawing classes and whatever other odd jobs she can pick up from Craigslist, then that would be fine. She's making that sacrifice for herself. Aaron is basically manipulating her into making that sacrifice for both of them, which is impossible. It's just physically impossible. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about too in this book, to go back to our conversation about the body, is that consequences always happen in the body, and sacrifices always come from the body, and art always comes from the body too. And your body is not a machine with, that runs on sunlight.
Yeah. Oh, what's the name of that group that does that? Oh, it's a real thing. I forget the name.
Oh, you mean the breatharians?
Breathanarians, yes.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As I frantically type.
No, but I mean.
But yeah,
they've been disproved. They're. Well, yeah. I mean, and of course we think of them as being wackadoos because it's impossible. Because we all know it's impossible.
Yeah. So you are also different from a lot of people I have on here, as you have more than one degree. you have the MFA, and you have been published in your more indie places as well as larger places as well. And there's your writing doesn't strike me as like academic writing in the sort of like pejorative sense, because I wouldn't think about it pejoratively because I enjoy it. But as I was reflipping through Binary Star today, and maybe it's because of my experience with different forms of writing since then, how do you think of yourself as a writer? Like, do you find yourself thinking of being like an academic type writer or something different?
Well, what do you mean by something different?
So I've been trying to like hammer down on something like through the episodes of this podcast. I've talked to people about like, what are they doing now that alt-lit isn't really a thing? I talked to Sam Pink about that, and sort of the idea of writing community and like these like schools of thought with regard to writing, that there's like indie writers, experimental writers, academic writers. And by academic writers, I guess I just mean like MFA recipients who also write, but not in huge presses. So by something else, I mean, you know, not that, like one of the other schools that I've listed or not listed, or I've been trying to, from, you know, the fringes, understand the various circles that exist within the contemporary writer ecosystem.
Yeah, I don't know that I think of myself as being part of a school, you know, of writing. I notice that there are some cliques in the literary world, and I've never been somebody who could fit in that way, which was very troubling to me as a teenager. But now, and I guess now, even, you know, because there's an inner child that we all carry around with us. You know, maybe there's a part of me that wonders too, like, where do I fit in? But I can't. That's not for me to decide. I think that I can't really make that decision. And I've been asked a similar question in the past about genre, because I write fiction and nonfiction. And my fiction ranges in style and form, and so does my nonfiction. And I also don't have a degree in journalism. I've just been, you know, I find my way as I go, which is very humbling. But, you know, I'm always told, you know, that those people who ask me, where does your book, you know, where does your work fit in, basically are asking me, like, where, not you, but, you know, in the past, when they ask about fiction or nonfiction, they're basically asking, you know, where should I shelve you in a bookstore? And I don't know. That's for the market to decide, not me. When I'm writing, I don't think about the market, or what you know. I think about rules of form, not rules of not you know, not the rules of packaging or design. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I teach, my approach is, you know, to give students a range of examples for how they might go about their work, and a set of tools to use when, you know, as they're, you know, as they would if they were making a sculpture or, you know, choreographing a dance. You know, there are principles of making art that hold true across disciplines. So I don't, you know, but, and I guess we'll talk about publishing too in my classes sometimes, but it's usually one class session, part of one class session, and it's kind of a Q&A format where if they have any questions about how to pitch their work or how to get published or whatever, you know, then we'll cover that, you know, in one go. But I really don't think it's productive when you're teaching somebody how to communicate the ineffable part of their soul. I don't think it's not useful for them as artists to think about where they're going to fit in when the work is done. It's because it's just scary and it's irrelevant anyway. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And it's kind of along the line that I've been getting, is that, like, I write the stuff I write, and I end up making friends that write similarly, that have similar philosophies, and that makes sense to me. Like that's pretty logical that would be the case. But
right, yeah, and I think actually a lot of authors find publishing to be tiring. The process of losing control of your own work can be really emotional. Other people's responses to your work can be really emotional. Watching your book sink or swim can be really emotional. And most writers are introverts. Some of them are also extroverts, but in order to be a writer, you have to be an introvert part of the time. Mm-hmm. And so, probably a lot of writers have that experience of feeling as if they don't fit in. you know, because that's kind of a fundamental part of being an introvert. It's like, I don't really want to, interacting with other people is exhausting. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if I just lost control of the point there, but
no, that's good.
Okay.
I find that it's been interesting to watch certain writers break from like the indie into getting published by larger publishers. Blake Butler, Jeff Jackson was also published from $2 Radio and then moved on to larger presses. What was that journey like for you? Like from Binary Star to Sunshine State to True Love?
I worked on Sunshine State and True Love with the same editor, Erin Wicks, at HarperCollins. She was at Harper Perennial, and now she's at Harper Books, and she's really just the best. We become close friends. I trust her with my inmost secrets and concerns and confessions. I feel lucky that to be working with somebody who understands me and my work and my project. And everybody at Harper is just really supportive and involved, and they care and they get it, and so that it's been great. I think my qualm with corporate publishing is on the it's just the fact of it being corporate. Rupert Murdoch owns HarperCollins. I don't like that feeling, and I know that there are people who work in publishing who don't like that aspect of it, and wish there were an alternative. And sometimes I dream, often, and especially lately, I've been dreaming of an alternative model whereby success is not measured by the size of your book advance, whereby authors can receive, like a salary, or some kind of assurance that they will be supported while they do their work, and not, authors work for free until they get lucky enough not to, right now, and then the size of your advance is determined by the size of your Twitter following, and it's just not fair, and it's racist, and it's homophobic, and it's colluding with evil, and I hate it. I love the people I work with at Harper, but I hate that part of it. I hate it, and I wish it were. And so, I guess that's why I have a lot of respect for the people at $2 Radio and every other who I've worked with before, and were so good to me and so good to all of their authors, and they just do really important work. But all independent publishers. So I don't know what's going to happen. In publishing, but I hope that we can make a move towards decentralizing publishing and paying authors fairly, and exploring alternative methods of bringing work into the world, methods that value the real labor that artists do.
Yeah. I agree. The idea of paying an artist a salary is fascinating to me. I hadn't even considered that,
Mm-hmm.
but I like that
I
a
know.
lot.
Why not? How come?
Right. Well,
I work every day. Every writer I know works every day in some way.
yeah, and I mean, you think about it, most people who work normal 9 to 5 hour jobs only actually do like 3 hours of work a day. To expect a writer to write for 3 hours a day straight, like that's an awful lot of labor that you're doing. Like that's a lot of emotional things that you're putting yourself through, and like intellectually.
Well, but I have to. Yes, you're right. But I also have to remind you that the work that a writer does happens elsewhere than on her computer.
Oh, indeed. Yeah.
For instance, I'm working right now and having this conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
This is, we both had to prepare for this,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
You had to. I mean, how many hours did you invest in reading my book and preparing questions and preparing the technology to record, and where you're going to store it and how you're going to edit it, and all of that is labor. When I teach other writers, it's labor. When I correspond with other writers planning events, that's labor. The event itself is labor. So, and all of this contributes to our culture in a really important way, and that needs to be recognized. There's too often, and I hear a lot of artists talking about this, and more lately, and especially artists of color, talking about the expectation that they perform free labor, in exchange for recognition or something, or, raising their profile as if that's necessary for that, as if they need that. And it's insulting and it's exploitative.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, that opens the door in my understanding. And, that's one of those things that's sort of like, not surprising, but like, oh yeah, that's right. I haven't really thought about it like that. Like, the fact that the word labor is so tied up with like negative emotions, for me at least, like, this doesn't feel like work because I'm enjoying doing this. I enjoy editing audio. So like, it doesn't feel like working. The stuff that feels like work is the stuff that makes me money. So, but yeah, absolutely. Like, that's completely right. And I mean, even in all like the sort of leftist, political, philosophical thought that I engage with, writers, artists tend to sort of just be left out of that conversation, right? Like all the examples are like factories, like, but indeed, like if you make a chair for Steelcase, it's really not that much different than writing a book for Penguin. You still assembled something, and then they're going to take surplus value from it. I guess it's just harder to quantify.
Right. Yeah, we've never really tried to. Yeah, we've never tried to. But it is labor. Yeah, I just had a radical thought when you were talking about the negative connotations of that word, and I couldn't help but think of the labor of childbirth, of a woman being in labor, and how, and I think, and how, wouldn't it be amazing if we actually paid women to give birth? And why don't we? Why don't we? Why did Lynn Seeger-Strong's narrator go into debt when she had to have a C-section? Right? I mean, why did she go into debt instead of being paid? For that for the very real physical sacrifice and labor that she gave. Right.
Especially since that child will almost certainly just become a laborer themselves.
Right? Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Just another body in the workforce. Mm-hmm.
Somebody should write a book about that.
I mean, I think so. Yeah. But but this is just that, and that's just one of innumerable examples of the kind of labor that we devalue in this society, who gets paid for their labor and what kind and on what pay scale.
Yeah.
Yep.
I worry about,
and what do we expect, and what kind of labor do we expect to be done for free?
Yeah, absolutely. I worry about the fascist implications that could come from giving a woman money for having a child. Like that, like, I'll give you $50,000 for a pure Aryan fetus.
Right. There's always a way to, I mean, and that's, I don't know, maybe that's the problem with utopias.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, I hadn't thought, and yeah, I mean, see, that's why, and this is where stories come from. We do have to. This is a novel waiting to happen, because you're right. We should think all the way through these implications.
Yeah, and just, oh God, language is so fun. Yeah, like labor, going into labor, and like how that might translate. I've been desperately trying to learn German for the past couple of years, and like. Rewiring your brain, they talk about in the movie Arrival, like how you rewire your brain when you learn a new language, and the way that, like, just the connotation that different words have, like how a book like that, you know, a book about giving labor or going through labor, giving birth, you know, attaching a monetary value to that for the reason that, you know, labor is called labor. How that might translate into a completely different language. It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, so much of narrative is guided by language and what it implies when you really stop and look at it and think through its etymology and make discoveries and connections that were always there, but that you had never known before. You know, it is like opening a new world. For instance, I mentioned toxicity earlier, and I was really thinking about, you know, how it manifests in true love, and I was thinking about how it manifests in love, and how it manifests in our environment and our waterways and our government, you know, and in masculinity and in femininity, and even the toxicity that comes from trauma that isn't dealt with, you know, and yeah, I mean, and it did open. I mean, it kind of opened the world of the book for me, and it also, you know, it opened. It came out a lot in the setting of the book, and so it really did make the world of the book. Yeah, language is fun that way, and it tells you a lot about how your memory is organized, how your neuroanatomy is organized. When you realize that you have been making these latent connections all along, and that's why it's showing up in your book, and that's how you've been understanding it, it opens up a part of your own mind to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Oh man, I love it when this happens in these interviews where I just, like, I can no longer think of how to continue.
Well, you're learning German, right? So how is this happening, and how is this happening for you in German?
In a much less meaningful way, like, if you say, like, what about this deck of cards, the Germans would say was ist mit, which is literally like what is with. So like, what about my deck of cards? And in German, it would translate to like, what is with my deck of cards, is sort of an interesting thing.
That's funny.
The word egal, E-G-A-L, means like not important. So if you were to say it is not important, you say es ist mir egal, which is like, it does me no importance. Where German like puts I and me in sentences with relation to things that are happening or objects or ideas is really interesting. Where like, it's kind of less declarative, like it is not important, rather than like it does no importance to me. You know, it's sort of like allows for it to be important in other ways.
The verbs are like reflexive. I know a little bit of Spanish, and I studied it in school. Growing up in Florida, a lot of the Spanish classes come with the territory, and so I took Spanish in school, and then I have traveled to Mexico a couple of times and Argentina, and so I would like brush up on my Spanish before traveling. And yeah, they love those reflexive verbs too. It's interesting how much like it takes. I mean, it's again like, I don't know. Nina kind of makes a joke about it, like in True Love, or in the midst of an argument where she kind of scoffs and says, "Well, everybody's the center of their own universe."
Yeah.
But that's kind of what it reminds me of. It's like, well, it does me no good, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how that shapes the way that you see the whole world, how language shapes the way you see the whole world and your relation to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea of translations brings me such anxiety lately. Like, as I get to the point where I'm feeling comfortable buying a book in German, I find myself stopping myself from buying books that were originally written in English that have been translated into German, because I'm like, no, I want to know how like Germans write, right? Like, I've read Kafka. There's that. I don't even know how ubiquitous it is, but it's stuck in my head. The pretentious, like, you'll never truly understand Kafka until you read it in the original German. And it's like always pushed me to like, yeah, I've read Kafka in English, but like, what am I missing?
Yeah. And are you able to read Kafka in German?
Oh God, no, not yet. I've tried, but it's tough.
I can't even read like a middle grade novel in Spanish. I've tried to. I mean, I can if it's really slow. Like I have to labor over every page, and I'll get through it, but I can't. It's not a comfortable reading level for me. I don't know. I call my Spanish restaurant Spanish. Like I'm really good at ordering things for everyone.
That's good. I
can. It's passable at the post office or the ATM.
Yeah, I think that's about where I'm at too. I don't have anybody to like speak with in German. Like it was a completely sort of arbitrary choice in high school when it was like, what language do you want to learn? You have to learn something, and it's like, everybody does Spanish. So instead of doing something like utilitarian, I just did like, I like Rammstein, so I guess I'll try to understand Rammstein songs.
Yeah, see, I can. I've learned a couple of Wiesn and Yandel songs. Like I like reggaeton. I like, and song lyrics are a good way for me to learn. But then I find that actually, they're not, because like a lot of them are love songs. So actually they're not really useful when I'm like trying to give a taxi driver directions. But it is a goal of mine. It's a huge goal of mine to get serious and learn and become fluent, which I know gets harder as I age. But I have thought about actually like going back to school and majoring in Spanish and getting a bachelor's degree or something, just because I need structure. I'm the kind of person that needs structure, and I don't know. But these are flights of fancy. We'll see if it actually happens.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important, and as somebody who reads a lot of work in translation, I'm super grateful for the work that translators do, and it's also a lot of thankless work. And it's a tragedy. It's on a global scale that American children do not learn foreign languages in schools as they should, as well as they should.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a couple.
And most Americans are not.
There's a couple immersion schools around here, like Spanish immersion schools. But yeah, it's definitely something that my wife and I have talked about. Like, I always joke that we'll have two kids and I'll speak to one in English and one in German, and I'll just get upset when they ask me why. Like, like if I'm gonna traumatize my children, I might as well do it in a way that's kind of silly. But
yeah.
But yeah, it's like I don't know. I also find it important. I had sort of a conversation about that with Noah Cicero when he was on here about haikus in Japanese, like Buddhist haikus that already have like hidden meaning, and then you're translating them into a different language, into your language, and then trying to like glean the meaning. There's like all extra hoops to jump over to get to what it is you're trying to get to.
There's an early version of True Love in which Nina leaves a haiku on Seth's doorknob, and I don't think it made it into the last draft, but but she writes out a basho haiku and folds it up into like origami and leaves it suspended from his doorknob. And it said, and the haiku was, between your life and mine, there is also the life of the cherry blossom. And that one haiku, I originally encountered that haiku, I don't even remember when. I must have been Nina's age, like so in my early 20s, in an anthology. And I went looking for it when I was writing the book because I never forgot it. And there's something about that image that just stuck in my mind. And that's the flower blooming between the two people, and that stuck in my mind. And so I went looking for it just to like confirm, fact check, and I couldn't find it. And it's because it was like some obscure translation, and I don't even know what I think there have been like 10 different translations of this one haiku, but it was a really obscure one, and probably not one that most translators would consider to be good, but it was the one that stuck with me. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Yeah.
So I feel like I can't remember where it was. As you were talking, I was trying to flip through, but there was this moment of anxiety that Nina feels about like that she's taken the wrong path in life, and I can't remember exactly what happens. But it's almost like she kind of like recounts her choices and then like has a moment of grief for like the choices that she didn't make. Am I thinking of a thing that actually exists?
I don't know. Yeah, good question. I don't know where exactly, because it seems like one of those moments that could happen more than once in this story. So I don't know exactly which one you're thinking of. Do you know what the scene is, or?
I feel like she's in the bookstore at that point. I don't annotate books as I read, so I'm working purely off of memory.
She's in the bookstore.
I think so.
So it's later in the book?
I think so, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. If you have any other details, I might be able to find it.
Yeah, well, you are the person who wrote it, so
yeah.
I guess it's not entirely important.
I think there's a lot of regret in the book.
Yeah,
and I will give you that. Yeah.
There was just like this moment as I was reading, and so I might have been like more just reading my mind reflected onto the page than what was actually written, but that like there's this anxiety that I feel and have been trying to put into words of like I'm terrified that I won't be able to experience everything that can possibly be experienced before I die. Like that anxiety has been plaguing me for the past couple of months. Totally unconnected to the fact that like we've all been stuck in our homes for the past months, just like on its own. And I feel like I felt that so strongly while reading True Love. Like every decision that's being made is like restricting the possibility of more and better experiences.
Oh, yeah. She's talking about the closing off. Yes, the closing off of possibilities beginning in the moment you're conceived. Is that
yes,
that
absolutely.
Is that the one? Okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about because she's just found out that she's just had an abortion.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, is that a spoiler? Ugh.
People should be reading the books I'm talking about on the show before I talk about them. I feel like that's your cost of entry. Podcasts are free. Buy the book.
Oh no. Spoiler alert. Okay, well, anyway.
I'll make a point of it in the intro, so people will have already heard the spoiler warning.
Yeah, well, so basically she's very cynical. She's a very cynical character. She has a very cynical outlook on love, I think, and on herself. Her self-image has suffered a blow at that point in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Her self-image has suffered a blow from page 1, but so she says something along the. I as an author, I am making myself laugh while I write. I have to be enjoying myself while I write, and sometimes I make myself laugh by saying the absolute most ridiculous thing I can think of at the time. And so Nina said something about, she's looking at a baby and, sitting near her and is talking about how this baby's life is basically going to be like trash, and this baby isn't even aware of how possibilities have been closing off since the moment of her conception or something along those lines,
Right.
But she's projecting, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think she also sometimes is, she's manipulating the reader in a way, she's like having a pity party with herself and asking for sympathy, in a not very admirable way sometimes.
Yeah. And, and the book does sort of end with the beginning of the apocalypse, really. Like,
yeah,
the ensuing incident to finally make the divorce happen is the election of Trump. Like, that certainly.
Yeah, I think it was. Well, I mean, they didn't get. Well, no, I mean, it's not. There's no. It's, first of all, I'll say there is no divorce in the book.
That's true.
Yeah, there's no divorce in the book. But there's for sure a moment of rupture with the election of Donald Trump. Yeah,
that's right.
And I think that was and again, I was, I said earlier, one of the things that I was thinking about was toxicity in our homes. And, I think that election was a moment of rupture for a lot of, people's relationships. It was a moment of truth,
Yeah.
Relationships with their intimate partners and their parents and their friends. And it has only continued to drive people apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just rereading the last page, and I'm remembering how I felt when I reread the last page, and I know why I blocked it out of my mind. Because it's just like, oh God, nobody learned anything. At least Aaron didn't, in my mind. I mean, maybe he did, but like, there's not enough evidence for me.
People can change.
Sure, they sure can.
Yeah, I think Nina has learned a lot.
Yeah.
There's, I do think she's learned a lot. How could you not, given what she's been through? And I think that line rings so true for her on so many levels. I mean, there are so many different interpretations, right?
Yeah.
Of the last line. I don't want to give the last line away, but
no.
I mean, yeah, there are lots of different ways. There are many different predictions that you could make, scenarios that could play out from there.
Right.
What could that possibly look like for each of them?
Mm-hmm.
And also, what has it looked like? I mean, a lot has happened in the ensuing pages.
Yeah, I remember feeling, as I read the last page of True Love, getting the same sort of feeling that I got at the end of Binary Star. I really like your endings. I find
Thanks.
You're welcome. I find that sometimes, I don't know, endings are hard. Stephen King notoriously knows that his endings are bad, but everybody buys his books and reads his books just kind of knowing that oh yeah, the last 5 pages are gonna just they're there because they have to be there. But yeah, I feel like endings are important, and yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it was interesting to me at the time that the impact hit the same for both books to me, even though they're different books and have different endings. It hit the same.
Yeah, I take a long time to find my endings. It really doesn't happen until the very last draft. For me, I wrote a lot of different versions of that ending, and Yeah, for me, it's actually always, it's the last line. It's when I write the last line that I know I've found the ending. And I mean, I might have ideas, various ideas about how something is going to play out as I near those pages, but I really don't know what's going to happen until I'm right there. Yeah, and then, I mean, even like there's in the last scene, there's an overturned bottle of laundry detergent that's like spilling into the gutter. That was a very last detail, I mean, I didn't really and know that was going to be there until I wrote it.
Yeah.
I was like, what would capture this mood perfectly, and the first, image that, I had to ask myself that question in order to come up with that image. I was like, how does this feel right now? If I had to capture this feeling in an image, what would that image be? And it was the most useless thing that I could think of, which is just soap cleaning the sewers.
Yeah.
Using soap to clean the sewers, So, yeah, and it's because it's an emotional process, like you're trying to capture feelings with words, and they're never going to be sufficient, and it's always going to take a long time to get there because emotions are really murky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Yeah, I feel like that's the way that you expressed writing that last little bit is sort of the difference that I intuit going back to our like academic versus just pure like indie sort of raw sort of writing, like the difference between jazz and like a symphony, where I feel like there's the knowledge of what questions to ask yourself versus like, or not even versus, but like along with intuiting what needs to happen. It's just like a more refined sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to respond to that. Yeah, I mean, every scene includes a certain number of elements, a certain number of, certain things have to be there in order for it to be a scene.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to have characters and dialogue, so that's covered, and then, a natural next question is, what should they say?
Yeah.
And then a natural next question for me is, what do I need them to say? What do I need to get across here? Meanwhile, you're helping the reader understand why certain things are being said or certain things are being done. Not every scene has dialogue, but, as an example, why certain things are being done. And so you have to begin thinking about images as delivering information. And I mean, so does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for instance, if a character takes another character's hand and you have an image of these, and you show the reader those hands clasped together, that's a piece of information. That's a moment of closeness, and even the character's reaction to their hand being taken is information.
Mm-hmm.
That's an image that delivers information, right? So, and similarly, the weather, in the scene, the atmosphere is information, So if it's overcast or if it's glaringly sunny and hot, that's also delivering, that's important emotional information. That's tone, Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm writing, and then the action and the dialogue comes out of, questions that I'm asking myself too. I mean, that's how I take the reader on an emotional journey with me. Not to be cliche, but yeah. I mean, it's like I'm helping them follow my inquiry. I'm going to read from chapter 2, and at this point, Nina has she's gone to rehab and she's back in her hometown. She dropped out of college and had to go to rehab for 2 months, and she's back in her hometown now trying to piece her life back together. And she's about to go see her hypnotherapist. It's swarming season, and my building is infested with termites. I awake to their wings beating against my cheekbones. I gather some into a plastic lunch bag to bring to my landlord, who's insisted she needs to see a living sample. My duplex neighbor composts in a plastic trash can 5 feet from my back door. I drag the can in front of their sun porch screen and ride my bicycle to the hypnotist's office. My mother disappeared and my father was always working, I tell her. I've been seeing the hypnotist on a sliding scale for the last month because I have a deep intuition that something is wrong with me, somehow related to my unnameable trauma, and hypnosis seems compatible with my daily wake and bake habit. She's white, in her late 40s, with dreadlocks and carved wooden gauges weighing down her ears. The henna on her hands looks like Spanish moss, and her office is plush with amber lighting, Palo Santo, and embroidered pillows. She told me in our first session that after 10 years of working with children in foster care and 5 years in disaster relief, this is the field where she feels she can make the most difference. I wish I could offer it for free, she said. I'd have a babysitter 3 or 4 nights a week, and it was always some teenager who would invite her boyfriend over, I say. I'd call boys in my class who didn't want to talk to me, who would answer the phone and hear my voice and hang up. Sometimes they were friends, but everyone eventually leaves me. When I moved back to Florida, none of my college friends even called me. After rehab, I attended NA for 2 weeks, then hooked up with a crust punk I met smoking outside after a meeting one night. The topic had been loneliness. I was gazing at a light fixture where moth after moth incinerated itself. I'm an only child too, he said to me, bumming a cigarette. Though drawing him closer into my emotional sphere seemed risky at that critical stage in my sobriety, I couldn't bring myself to prefer being alone after that. I couldn't find it in me to reject him when he'd shown me such kindness as to ask me for a lighter. I moved him in with me. He began smoking crack again, but I couldn't take him out because then he'd be homeless. This went on for weeks until I met Seth riding my bicycle home from the pizza shack. He was 2 blocks from my apartment, unloading bags from the back of the gallery's pickup. I recognized him as a moody artist from my high school. He invited me upstairs to drink tea, and a week later we fucked on his mite-crawling rag rug. I continued fucking him for another month until I worked up the nerve to dump Mission. Mission skipped town to go train hopping again. Seth has never let me forget this series of events, even 2 years later. Whenever he can, he subtly alludes to the weird of my life. Seth doesn't trust me, I tell the hypnotist. It's his Lutheran upbringing and his parents divorced, and then, of course, his dad died, hit by a Mack truck. I think he blames his mother on some level, and by extension, all women. I don't know how to leave him, or if I should, or how I even could, or how I can fix things between us. He's moving to New York with me, which seems to suggest he loves me. You love him, she says. Yes. Love is a trance. Is that a song? A trance is an inwardly directed, selectively focused attention. It's a story in which you become so absorbed you can't see anything else. She opens a drawer to her left and removes a smudge stick. She lights it and waves it back and forth until the smell of sage fills the room. Pretend you're alone, she says. She's obscured behind a curtain of smoke. They're orchids, Seth told me that first day upstairs. He was reading my mind, brewing tea in a thick jar. He set a timer on the kitchen counter in a beam of late afternoon light. The room was dense with tendrils of hanging flowers, which I'd been admiring. They're not always the most beautiful, but they have bilateral symmetry, so when they bloom, they look like human faces. They watch you. He kept his eyes downcast, then looked directly into mine. He was taller than me by almost a foot, so I tilted my chin up to him. His cotton shirt was worn through, nearly transparent. Do you smoke weed? He said, inviting me to sit on the rug while he sketched. He passed the joint down to me. Chrysanthemums bloomed in the golden water of my jar. The sound of him enchanted me. His confidence convinced me he was wise. What is art, Nina? He asked me. I still am not sure. What faculties does it command? Which aspects of our humanity, of ourselves? It may be easy to talk about, but it's hard to accept. What do I want out of it? Where do I want to go with it? He turned on a lecture by Alan Watts and talked alongside or over it for my benefit, filling in the details for my full understanding. The topic, coincidentally, was how to attract your soulmate. On the deepest level, a person on the whole can get in the way of his own existence, Watts said. I found myself telling him about the novel I was writing. I asked him if he would read it and give me feedback. I'd begun drafting it in my notebook when I moved back to Florida, disconnected from the internet and unsure of what else to do with my sobriety. The story followed a college student who'd been forced to go to rehab. I brought him a copy the next day in an orange envelope. I'd written the title on the front and signed my name underneath. "I'd like you to model nude for me sometime," he said, taking the envelope. He held me with his gaze, "if you would be comfortable with that." "A trance shapes what we see and how we respond," says the hypnotist. She hands me a tiny bottle of water and a tissue. I've drooled on myself. "We're highly receptive, much like when we're in love. It's debatable whether we even have full use of our judgment or our faculties." She tells me I need to work on my self-esteem, then she leads me through an intervention that involves tapping various parts of my body, repeating a mantra. I leave with a recording of our session that she's burned onto a CD, which I have no way of playing. I notice I've been in her office for 2 hours. "Please don't apologize," she says. "I enjoy it as much as you do."